Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Imagine pulling up to the house you inherited and there's a locksmith at your front door. I'm like, "Can I help you?" And he goes, "New owner wants the locks changed today." New owner of my house. I sprint to the mailbox and find a stack of HOA letters that explain everything. But how do you miss notices you never received? I never thought I'd be posting in this subreddit, but here I am, still processing what happened over the past few months. This whole situation started when my great aunt passed away last year and left me her house. I should probably give you some background first. My great aunt was what you'd call a character. She lived in this beautiful mid-century modern home in a gated community that had become pretty upscale over the years. The house itself was gorgeous, but definitely showed its age. Think original terrazzo floors, built-in planters, and those big windows that were amazing but probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. She was pretty reclusive in her later years, kept to herself mostly, and apparently had some ongoing issues with the HOA that I didn't really know about at the time. When she passed, I inherited the house along with a decent chunk of change. The thing is, I was in the middle of a 2-year work contract in another state, so I wasn't planning to move in right away. I figured I'd keep paying the property taxes and utilities, maybe visit every few months to check on things, and eventually decide whether to renovate and move in or sell it. The house was paid off completely, so it wasn't like I was in any rush. I made sure to handle all the proper paperwork when I inherited it. Got the deed transferred, updated the property tax records, even paid the annual HOA dues when they came due about 6 months after I inherited. I sent in my contact information and everything. Looking back, this detail becomes pretty important later. So there I was, living my life, working my contract, occasionally driving down on weekends to check on the house and do basic maintenance. I'd mow the small front lawn, make sure no pipes had burst, that kind of thing. The neighbors barely saw me because I usually came down late Friday and left early Sunday morning. This went on for about 8 months. Then one weekend, I drove down to start planning some renovation work. I had finally decided I wanted to move in once my contract was up, so I was excited to really dive into updating the place while keeping its character intact. I pulled into the driveway around noon on a Saturday and immediately noticed something was wrong. There was a van in the driveway that definitely wasn't mine, and some guy was standing at my front door with what looked like a toolbox. My heart basically dropped into my stomach. I got out of my car and walked over, trying to stay calm. The guy looked up when he heard my car door slam. "Can I help you?" I asked. He looked confused. "Yeah, I'm here to change the locks. New owner wants them changed today." New owner. Those words hit me like a truck. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the owner of this house." The guy pulled out his phone and showed me some kind of work order. "Says here the property was sold at auction 3 days ago. HOA office sent me the paperwork." My hands started shaking. I told the locksmith there had obviously been some huge misunderstanding and asked him to wait while I figured this out. He seemed like a decent guy and agreed to hold off until I could sort things out. I went to my mailbox first. I have a post office box in the city where I work, but I figured maybe something had been sent to the house address. The mailbox was stuffed full. Bills, advertisements, and then I saw them. A whole stack of official-looking envelopes from the HOA. I tore through them right there on the sidewalk. Past due notice. Final notice. Notice of intent to lien. And finally, notice of foreclosure sale. My legs felt weak. I sat down on the front steps and read through everything. According to these notices, I owed over $15,000 in special assessments for unauthorized landscaping modifications and architectural violations. The letters claimed that the natural desert landscaping my aunt had maintained for over 30 years was somehow in violation of community standards. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. Every single notice was dated within the past 3 months, and they were all sent to the house address, not my actual mailing address that I had provided when I paid the HOA dues. The final notice, dated just 4 days ago, stated that my property had been sold at a non-judicial foreclosure auction for $25,000. $25,000. For a house worth at least $400,000, probably more given the recent market. I called the number on the HOA letterhead immediately. A receptionist answered. "I need to speak to someone about my property," I said. "There's been a foreclosure sale, but I never received proper notice." She transferred me to someone who identified herself as the HOA president. I later learned this was Barbara, though she didn't give her name initially. The sale was conducted according to all applicable laws, she said when I explained the situation. Notices were properly sent to the property address as required. But I provided my mailing address when I paid dues, I said. I don't live at the property address. That's not our problem. Property owners are responsible for checking their property regularly. The assessment was levied, notices were sent, and the sale was completed. Everything was done by the book. Her tone was so dismissive, so casual, like she was talking about misplaced mail instead of someone's home. I asked about the assessment itself, what exactly I had allegedly done wrong. The property was cited for maintaining unauthorized desert landscaping that doesn't conform to community aesthetic standards. The board voted to require all properties to maintain traditional lawns and approved plant species only. This was news to me. My aunt's landscaping was beautiful, natural desert plants that required almost no water and had been there for decades. When exactly had this vote happened? I'll need to see documentation of this community vote, I said. There was a pause. All board decisions are properly recorded. The sale is final. You have 48 hours to remove any personal belongings from the property. Then she hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone. This couldn't be legal. You can't just steal someone's house because they didn't get mail sent to an address where they don't live. But the locksmith was still waiting and I was starting to panic. I called him over and explained that there was definitely a legal issue that needed to be resolved before any locks got changed. He was understanding and said he'd tell his dispatcher the job was on hold pending owner dispute. At least I still had keys to my own house. That evening, I drove back to my apartment and spent the entire night researching foreclosure law. What I learned made me furious. In most states, HOAs do have the power to foreclose for unpaid assessments, but there are strict notice requirements. They have to make a good faith effort to actually notify the property owner, not just stick letters in a mailbox at a vacant house. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove back to the house. I needed to understand exactly what had happened and when. More importantly, I needed to figure out who had bought my house for $25 grand. I went to the county recorder's office and started pulling records. The property had indeed been sold at auction 3 days prior. The buyer was listed as Desert Holdings LLC. I'd never heard of them, but the address was local. The recording clerk was helpful and showed me how to look up the LLC registration. Desert Holdings had been formed just 2 weeks before the auction. The registered agent was listed as someone with the same last name as Barbara, the HOA president I'd spoken with. This was starting to look like more than just a bureaucratic screw-up. I decided to go directly to the HOA office. I needed to see their records, understand exactly when these assessments had been levied, and figure out how to fight this. I had never dealt with anything like this before, but I wasn't about to let someone steal my inheritance. The HOA office was in a small strip mall about 2 miles from the community. It was just a basic office with a couple desks and filing cabinets. The same receptionist from the phone was there, and behind her sat a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression like she smelled something unpleasant. This had to be Barbara. "I'm here about the foreclosure sale on my property," I said to the receptionist. Barbara looked up from her computer. "You must be the nephew. I wondered when you'd show up." Her tone was already condescending, like I was some irresponsible kid who hadn't been paying attention. I kept my voice as calm and professional as possible. "I need to review the assessment records and understand the timeline of notices that were sent." Barbara stood up and walked over to the counter. She was shorter than I expected, but she carried herself like she owned the place, which I was starting to realize she probably thought she did. "The assessment was properly levied by the board of directors," she said. "Notices were sent according to state requirements. The foreclosure was conducted by a licensed trustee company. Everything was done correctly." "I never received any of those notices," I said. "They were sent to a property where I don't live, despite the fact that I provided my actual mailing address when I paid dues." Barbara shrugged. "State law only requires notice to be sent to the property address. If you don't live there, that's your choice. Property owners have a responsibility to check their property regularly." The way she said choice made it clear she thought I was just making excuses. I asked to see the records of the board vote that had supposedly authorized the assessment. "Board records are confidential," she said. "I'm a property owner in the community. I have a right to review HOA records." She sighed like I was being a huge inconvenience. "Fine, but I can tell you right now, everything was done properly. The assessment was for $15,000 to cover the cost of bringing your property into compliance with community standards. $15,000 to remove some desert plants and put in grass. That seemed excessive, but I wanted to see the actual records. Barbara went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. She handed me a single sheet of paper with board resolution at the top. It was dated 3 months ago and stated that all properties must maintain traditional landscaping consistent with community aesthetic standards. At the bottom were 3 signatures. "Where are the meeting minutes?" I asked. "This is the resolution, that's what you asked for." I asked for records of the vote. "Where are the meeting minutes showing community discussion and the vote count?" Barbara's expression hardened. "The board makes decisions for the community. Homeowners don't vote on operational matters." This didn't sound right. From my research the night before, I knew that major policy changes and large assessments typically required community approval, not just board approval. But I didn't want to show my hand yet. So 3 board members decided on their own to charge me $15,000 to remove landscaping that's been there for 30 years. "The landscaping was not in compliance," Barbara repeated. "The resolution was properly adopted. The assessment was levied. You failed to pay. The property was foreclosed. It's really that simple." Her smugness was incredible. She was talking about stealing someone's house like it was a parking ticket. "Who bought the property at auction?" I asked. "That's public record. You can look it up yourself." "I did. Desert Holdings, LLC. Registered agent has your last name." For the first time, Barbara looked slightly uncomfortable. "I don't know anything about that company." "You don't know anything about a company that has the same last name as you and bought my property for $25,000? Look," Barbara said, and now her voice had an edge to it. "The sale is final. The new owner has already made plans for the property. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings or they'll be disposed of. I'd recommend you contact a moving company." She reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "These folks do good work." I looked at the card. The moving company had the same last name as Barbara. The whole thing was a setup. Barbara and her family had figured out a way to steal my house for practically nothing, and they had the whole operation planned out from assessment to moving company. But she had made one crucial mistake. She was way too confident, too dismissive. She clearly thought I was just going to walk away and let them keep my house. I smiled and thanked her for her time. "That's it?" she said. "You're giving up?" "Oh no," I said. "I'm just getting started. I need to do some research first." Barbara's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "The sale is final," she repeated. "There's nothing to research." I nodded and walked out of the office. As soon as I got to my car, I started making calls. First call was to a real estate attorney. I found one who specialized in HOA disputes and foreclosure defense. When I explained the situation, he was immediately interested. "They sent all notices only to the property address even though they had your mailing address on file?" he asked. "That's right, and the assessment was for $15,000 based on a board resolution that apparently no one else voted on." That could be a problem for them. Most states require HOAs to make reasonable efforts to actually notify property owners. Sending mail to a vacant house when they have your real address might not qualify as reasonable. And if the assessment wasn't properly authorized. He agreed to take the case and said he'd start by filing an emergency motion to stop any transfer of the property pending investigation of the foreclosure procedures. Second call was to my great-aunt's house. I needed to go through her papers more carefully. She had been a paralegal for most of her career, and I had a feeling she might have kept records about her own battles with the HOA. I spent that entire afternoon going through filing cabinets in her home office. My aunt was incredibly organized. She had folders for everything, all neatly labeled and arranged chronologically. And then I found it, a thick folder labeled HOA Evidence File. Inside were years of correspondence, meeting minutes, financial records, and what looked like copies of legal documents. My aunt hadn't just been fighting with the HOA, she had been building a case against them. The deeper I dug, the more I understood why Barbara had been so eager to get rid of this property. My aunt had documented everything. Barbara had been HOA president for 6 years, and during that time she had been systematically looting the community reserve funds. There were copies of invoices for emergency roof repairs that were never done, landscape maintenance contracts with Barbara's own company, and legal fees paid to a law firm that turned out to be her son-in-law's practice. Thousands and thousands of dollars in fraudulent expenses, all signed off on by a board that seemed to consist entirely of Barbara's relatives and friends. But the most damaging document was a copy of the HOA's governing documents. According to the bylaws, any assessment over $5,000 had to be approved by a vote of the entire community, not just the board. Barbara's $15,000 landscaping assessment was completely invalid. I also found copies of correspondence between my aunt and the state attorney general's office. She had been preparing to file a complaint about HOA financial misconduct when she got sick. This changed everything. Barbara hadn't just tried to steal my house with an improper foreclosure. She had been stealing from the entire community for years, and my aunt had the proof. I called my attorney back and told him what I had found. "This is bigger than just your foreclosure," he said. "If you can prove systematic financial fraud, the entire board could face criminal charges, and any actions taken by a fraudulent board could be invalidated." "What's our next move?" "We file everything: emergency injunction to stop the property transfer, motion to invalidate the foreclosure based on improper notice and invalid assessment, and we send copies of the financial documents to the state attorney general. This Barbara person just made a very expensive mistake." The next morning, I got a call from the locksmith. Someone had called his company saying the property dispute was resolved and they wanted to reschedule the lock change for that afternoon. I asked who had called. Lady from the HOA office said the new owner was getting impatient. Barbara was trying to rush the transfer before I could file any legal challenges. She was probably planning to get the locks changed and claim possession was complete. I called my attorney immediately. "Can they do that? Just change the locks while we're fighting the foreclosure?" "Not legally. Any transfer of possession before the dispute is resolved could be considered trespass, but they might try anyway and hope you don't fight it." "What should I do?" "Be there when they show up. Make it clear you're disputing their right to the property. Record everything. If they try to force their way in anyway, call the police." I drove back to the house and waited. Sure enough, the locksmith showed up at 2 o'clock, this time with 2 other people. One was a woman in her 30s who looked like a younger version of Barbara. The other was a heavy-set man in an expensive suit. I walked out to meet them. "There's still an active dispute over this property," I told the locksmith. "I wouldn't recommend changing anything until it's resolved." The woman stepped forward. "I'm the property manager for Desert Holdings. We bought this house at a legal foreclosure auction. You're trespassing. I'm the legal owner of this property. The foreclosure is being challenged in court." The man in the suit spoke up. "The sale was final. You have no legal right to be here." "And you are?" "Legal counsel for Desert Holdings." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'm documenting that you're trying to take possession of property that's under active legal dispute. My attorney has already filed motions challenging the foreclosure." The property manager woman looked nervous, but the lawyer seemed confident. "File all the motions you want. Possession is 9/10 of the law." "Actually," I said, "breaking into someone's house is burglary regardless of whether you think you own it." The locksmith looked back and forth between us. "Look, I just changed locks. I'm not getting in the middle of some legal fight." He packed up his tools and left. The property manager and lawyer had a whispered conversation, then got in their car and drove away. I called my attorney and told him what had happened. "Good, you handled that exactly right. The fact that they tried to take possession while knowing there was a legal dispute shows consciousness of guilt. That'll help us in court." "When will we know about the injunction?" "Should hear back from the judge today or tomorrow, but I have good news. I sent the financial documents to a contact at the state attorney general's office. They're very interested. Apparently they've been getting complaints about HOA fraud in that county for months." That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I wanted to understand the community better and maybe talk to some neighbors about what had been happening with the HOA. The first person I met was an older gentleman working in his garden. When I introduced myself as the new owner of my aunt's house, he looked surprised. "I thought the HOA sold that place," he said. I explained that I was the rightful owner and that there had been some kind of mistake with the foreclosure process. "That doesn't surprise me," he said. "Barbara and that board have been pulling all kinds of nonsense lately. My assessment doubled this year, and when I asked for an explanation, they told me it was none of my business." We talked for about 20 minutes. He told me that several neighbors had been complaining about sudden increases in fees, special assessments for work that never seemed to get done, and a general feeling that the board was hiding something. "Your aunt was the only one who ever stood up to them," he said. "She came to every board meeting, asked the hard questions, demanded to see financial records. They hated her." "Did she ever talk to you about what she found?" "Not in detail, but she hinted that there were some serious problems. She said she was working on something that would clean house with the HOA. Then she got sick and everything went quiet." I thanked him for the information and continued walking. I talked to 4 more neighbors, and every single one had similar stories. Rising fees, mysterious assessments, work that was charged for but never done, and a board that refused to answer questions. By the time I got back to the house, I had a much clearer picture of what had been happening. Barbara hadn't just tried to steal my house. She had been systematically ripping off the entire community for years. My aunt had been building a case against her, and when my aunt died, Barbara saw an opportunity to eliminate the evidence by seizing the property. The next morning, my attorney called with an update. Good news and bad news. The judge granted the emergency injunction. Desert Holdings can't transfer or modify the property until the foreclosure dispute is resolved. But Barbara's lawyer has filed a motion claiming the foreclosure was completely proper and asking the court to dismiss our challenge. What are our chances? With the evidence you found in your aunt's files, very good. The improper notice alone should be enough to invalidate the foreclosure. The fraudulent assessment makes it even stronger, but we need to be prepared for them to fight hard. They have a lot to lose if this comes out. What about the criminal investigation? That's moving forward separately. The AG's office has opened a formal investigation into the HOA's financial practices. They're going to want to interview you about what you found in your aunt's records. That afternoon, I got a call from Barbara herself. I understand you're causing problems over this foreclosure, she said without any preamble. I'm protecting my legal rights, I replied. Look, maybe we can work something out. The buyer might be willing to sell the property back to you at cost plus expenses. At cost plus expenses? $25,000 for what they paid, plus legal fees, holding costs, that kind of thing. Probably around $40,000 total. She wanted me to pay $40,000 to buy back my own house that she had stolen for $25,000. I'll pass, I said. This is a one-time offer. If you drag this out in court, it's going to cost you a lot more in attorney fees, and you're not guaranteed to win. Actually, I'm pretty confident about my chances. There was a long pause. You have no idea what you're messing with here. The board has resources, connections. You're just one person. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you good advice. Take the deal. I hung up on her. An hour later, I got a call from someone claiming to be a code enforcement officer. He said there had been complaints about improper occupancy of my property and he needed to conduct an inspection. I called my attorney immediately. They're trying to harass you into giving up, he said. Don't let anyone inspect anything without proper documentation. If it's a real code enforcement issue, they'll have official paperwork. The code enforcement officer never showed up with any paperwork. That evening, I decided to attend the monthly HOA board meeting. According to the community bylaws, these meetings were supposed to be open to all property owners. I wanted to see Barbara in action and maybe learn more about how she had been operating. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. When I walked in, there were about 15 people scattered around folding chairs. Barbara was sitting at a table at the front with 2 other board members. She saw me come in and her expression darkened. This is a board meeting for community residents only. I'm a property owner in the community, I said. That's disputed. Not by any court. The injunction specifically maintains my ownership rights pending resolution of the dispute. One of the residents spoke up. Let him stay. We want to hear what's going on with his property anyway. Barbara looked like she wanted to argue, but apparently decided it wasn't worth the fight. Fine, but if you disrupt the meeting, you'll be removed. I took a seat in the back and listened. The meeting was a masterclass in how to run a corrupt organization. Every agenda item was presented as already decided, with no real discussion or input from residents. When people asked questions about finances or expenses, Barbara would give vague non-answers about proprietary information and ongoing negotiations. When they got to new business, one of the residents asked about the foreclosure sale of my aunt's property. That matter has been resolved, Barbara said. The property was properly foreclosed for non-payment of assessments and sold at auction according to state law. But I heard the owner is challenging it in court, the resident said. Anyone can file frivolous lawsuits, Barbara replied. It doesn't change the fact that the sale was legal and final. I raised my hand. You're not recognized, Barbara said. I have a right to speak at community meetings. Not about personal legal matters. Several residents were looking back and forth between us. I could tell they were curious about what was really happening. I'm not asking to discuss legal matters, I said. I have a question about the assessment policy that led to the foreclosure. Barbara looked trapped. She couldn't refuse to discuss community policies without looking obviously unfair. What's your question? She said through gritted teeth. The assessment on my property was $15,000 for landscaping violations. I'd like to know when the community voted to approve this new landscaping policy. The board makes policy decisions. According to the community bylaws, assessments over $5,000 require a community vote. When was that vote held? The room went completely quiet. Several residents were taking notes. The board has authority to levy assessments for code violations, Barbara said. Can you show me where in the bylaws it says the board can impose $15,000 assessments without a community vote? Barbara was starting to look flustered. This isn't the appropriate forum for this discussion. This seems like exactly the right forum. These residents deserve to know what policies the board is implementing that could affect their properties. One of the residents spoke up. I'd like to hear the answer too. My assessment went up $3,000 this year with no explanation. Another resident chimed in. Same here, and I asked for documentation and was told it was confidential. Barbara was losing control of the meeting. These matters will be addressed through proper channels. What are the proper channels? I asked. You can submit written requests to the board. I did. You denied them. The meeting was turning into exactly what Barbara had been trying to avoid, residents asking questions and demanding accountability. She quickly moved to adjourn, but not before several residents approached me afterward asking for more information. I exchanged contact information with about 6 neighbors who were all dealing with similar issues. Sudden assessment increases, denied records requests, and general stonewalling from the board. We agreed to meet informally to compare notes and figure out what was going on. 2 days later, my attorney called with major news. The State Attorney General's office executed search warrants on the HOA office and Barbara's home this morning, he said. Search warrants? That was fast. The evidence you provided was apparently the missing piece in a larger investigation. They've been looking into a network of HOA board members and management companies that have been systematically embezzling from communities across the county. Is Barbara in custody? Not yet, but they seized boxes of documents and financial records. The investigation is now criminal, not just civil. What does this mean for my foreclosure case? It means we're not just going to win. We're going to win big. Any actions taken by a board engaged in criminal fraud can be invalidated. The foreclosure, the assessments, probably years of board decisions. That afternoon, I got another call from Barbara. You need to drop this lawsuit immediately, she said. Her previous smugness was completely gone. Why would I do that? Because you're destroying this community. The state investigation is going to cost everyone money. Property values are going to plummet. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started stealing from your neighbors. I never stole anything. Every expense was legitimate. Then you have nothing to worry about from the investigation. There was a long pause. What do you want? I want my house back, clear title, and compensation for my legal fees and damages. That's it? That's what I wanted from the beginning. You're the one who made this complicated. Fine. I'll talk to my lawyer about settling. But it was too late for settlements. The next morning, local news trucks were parked outside the HOA office. Barbara and 2 other board members had been arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The story was front-page news. According to the news report, the investigation had uncovered over $200,000 in fraudulent expenses over 3 years. Barbara had been paying herself through shell companies for work that was never done, inflating legitimate expenses and pocketing the difference, and using HOA funds for personal expenses. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters wanting interviews about the foreclosure that had exposed the fraud. I referred them all to my attorney. The court hearing on my foreclosure challenge was scheduled for the following week, but it turned out to be unnecessary. With Barbara and the other board members facing criminal charges, Desert Holdings voluntarily agreed to quitclaim the property back to me in exchange for my agreement not to sue them personally. The HOA's insurance company ended up paying my legal fees and damages for the improper foreclosure. The community held emergency elections for a new board, and several of my neighbors were elected on a platform of transparency and accountability. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after Barbara's arrest, I was finally ready to start the renovations I had originally planned. I was sitting on my aunt's back patio, going through contractor bids, when I heard a car pull up in the driveway. It was the same locksmith who had originally been called to change my locks. He walked up to the back gate with a sheepish expression. "Hey," he said, "I just wanted to apologize for that whole mess a few months ago. I had no idea what was really going on." "No worries," I said. "You were just doing your job." Yeah, but I felt bad about it when I saw the news. That lady was crazy. What do you mean? She called me 4 times that week, trying to get me to change the locks even after you said not to. Offered to pay double, then triple. I finally had to tell her to stop calling. This was news to me. She tried to pay you extra to change the locks anyway? Oh yeah, she was really determined. Said something about how the property had to be secured before you could cause more problems. I thought it was weird at the time. After he left, I called my attorney and told him about the locksmith's revelation. That's evidence of consciousness of guilt, he said. She knew the foreclosure was fraudulent and was trying to cover it up by taking physical possession of the property. Is that useful for anything at this point? The district attorney might be interested. It shows premeditation and intent to obstruct justice. Sure enough, this information became part of the criminal case against Barbara. Her attempts to rush possession of my property were used to prove that she knew the foreclosure was improper. Barbara eventually pled guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which totaled almost $300,000, including interest and penalties. The best part? Her own house was foreclosed on to pay the restitution. I drove by one day and saw a "For Sale by Bank" sign in her front yard. The irony was perfect. Desert Holdings, which turned out to be owned by Barbara's brother-in-law, was dissolved as part of the criminal investigation. He faced charges as well for his role in the conspiracy. As for my house, the renovations turned out beautifully. I kept all of my aunt's original desert landscaping, which is now considered a model for sustainable gardening by the new HOA board. Property values in the community actually went up after the corruption was exposed and cleaned up. I still live there, and I'm now serving as treasurer on the HOA board. We've implemented complete financial transparency, monthly detailed reports to all residents, and strict oversight of all expenses over $500. Sometimes I sit on the same back patio where my aunt used to work on her investigation, and I think about how proud she would be that her work finally paid off. She spent years documenting Barbara's crimes, and even though she didn't live to see justice done, her evidence file made the whole thing possible. The new board installed a small plaque by the community mailboxes dedicating the reformed HOA to residents who ask the hard questions and demand accountability. It doesn't mention my aunt by name, but everyone knows who it's for. Barbara tried to contact me once from prison, asking if I would write a letter to the parole board supporting her early release. I never responded. Some people never learn that actions have consequences. The community is thriving now. We actually have proper reserve funds, legitimate contractors doing real work, and a board that answers questions instead of hiding behind claims of confidentiality. My neighbors tell me it's the best the community has functioned in years. And my aunt's house? It's worth twice what it was when I inherited it. But more importantly, it's home. Every time I walk through that front door, I remember what my aunt taught me through her example. That sometimes the most important battles are the quiet ones, fought with paperwork and persistence instead of drama and confrontation. Barbara thought she could steal my inheritance and get away with it because she assumed I wouldn't fight back. She was wrong about that, just like she was wrong about thinking she could steal from an entire community without consequences. The funny thing is, if she had just left my aunt's property alone, her embezzlement might never have been discovered. But her greed made her overconfident, and her overconfidence made her sloppy. In trying to steal my house, she exposed her own crimes and destroyed everything she had spent years building. I guess that's the thing about karma. It doesn't always come when you expect it, but it always comes eventually, and sometimes it brings search warrants. The neighborhood is peaceful now, the way I imagine my aunt always wanted it to be. Every evening I sit on her back patio and watch the sunset through the desert plants she loved so much. The same plants that Barbara tried to use as an excuse to steal my home are now protected by community bylaws as heritage landscaping. It's a good reminder that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. My aunt knew that, and now I know it too. The next one is an entitled people story. This last weekend I was out of town in Houston taking care of some clients in the area. Because I come to Houston every few months, I stuck to my usual routine per usual. I would hit one of the restaurants within the hotel, grab a chair at the main bar, and wrap up my night with a meal and a drink from a long day of work. Well, on Sunday night there must have been a bachelorette party in town. And this group of ladies was running around the hotel doing a scavenger hunt, and after they were all running around back and forth, they all came and circled around the bar for drinks. There wasn't a lot of people at the bar to begin with since it was 11 p.m. at this point on a Sunday, so the only people there was me, this group, a random couple, and a group of 2 to 3 guys. Out of nowhere, I see one of the guys from the group stand up, walk over to some of the girls from the bachelorette party and offer to buy them all shots. Immediately, I was thinking, damn, this guy is out buying this group of 5 to 10 ladies shots, that's cool. But after he bought the shots, he decided to grab a chair and pull it directly to the middle of their group. They laughed and seemed unbothered. A few minutes go by and he buys them another round, then the other friend comes by and joins them and he does the same. This essentially went on for about an hour or so, and I guess some of the ladies were ready to call it a night, and that triggered the rest to follow suit. This is where the entitlement comes into play. As the ladies started to grab their things, one of the guys suddenly said, "Wait, why are y'all leaving? We have been buying you drinks for the last hour. At least give us your numbers." And the ladies said, "No thanks, we are taken, but thanks for the drinks," and waved bye. Then that same guy got all flustered and started cussing at them and calling them all sorts of names. So I sat down my drink, walked over and told them, "No one told you to keep buying them drinks. They are celebrating and you kept insisting. They owe you nothing. Accept that." And they grabbed their stuff and walked away. If you're going to spend money on a group of people, don't expect anything out of it. Simply congratulate the party, have some fun, and walk away. Anyway, thank you for watching.